Your eyes open on their own? No buzzing alarm ripping you out of sleep. No notification waiting on a screen. No place you're expected to be in 20 minutes. You sit there for a moment, and one simple question sits with you. What do I do with today? For most people right now, that question barely exists. Your calendar already answered it. But for roughly 300,000 years, that question was the entire morning. Not once in a while, every single day for nearly every human who ever lived. Here's the number that makes this strange. The average person alive today will spend about 90,000 hours of their life working. Stretch that out, and it's the equivalent of working non-stop, day and night, for more than 10 straight years. 1/3 of every waking hour you'll ever have traded for a paycheck. Now here's the part that should stop you. For most of our species' existence, that trade didn't exist. There was no job to clock into, no boss deciding your schedule, no career ladder, no resume, no Sunday night dread before Monday. Employment as a concept is almost brand new. So if your ancestors weren't spending 1/3 of their lives working, what were they doing instead? Were they just fighting to survive from sunrise to sunset, exhausted and starving? Or is that picture, the one most of us grew up believing, actually wrong? The evidence says something far more surprising, and once you see it, you may never look at your own schedule the same way again. Before we get into it, if stories like this pull you in, hit subscribe. This channel exists to make you rethink everything you assumed about being human. This is where the story takes its first real turn, and it begins with something simple: fire. The earliest solid evidence of humans actively controlling fire comes from Wonderwork Cave, deep in the hills of South Africa, dating back nearly 1,000,000 years. That single discovery not only pushed back the timeline, it marked the moment when the human day cycle was rewritten. Before fire, your ancestors lived to the same rhythm as every other primate on the savannah. When the light went out, your options narrowed. You found a ledge, a branch, a secluded hollow, and you stayed there until morning. Moving after dark wasn't brave, it was reckless. Human eyesight is poor in low light conditions, a serious drawback when you share the landscape with animals engineered to adapt to those conditions. Leopards, hyenas, wolves, each of these species mastered the night in ways we never could. Fire reversed that order almost overnight. A single campfire created a relatively safe radius, about 9 meters. Entering that circle, predators would keep their distance. Stepping outside, the chances of survival dropped significantly. This wasn't a theoretical guess. Researchers studying modern hunter-gatherer communities directly observed this pattern. Those who moved away from the fire after dark faced a significantly higher risk of encountering predators. Even now, even as the modern world has changed so much, but protection is only half the benefit fire provides. The other half is easily overlooked, and it may be more important. Fire gave humans time they never had before. Imagine the schedule before fire. A useful day lasts from sunrise to sunset, period. In summer, that's a fairly long period of daylight. In winter, at higher latitudes, that period can shrink to about 8 hours. When fire came along, 2 to 4 additional useful hours appeared at either end of each day. Not just once, but every day for thousands of generations, accumulating gradually across species. And those extra hours weren't spent chopping more wood or hunting with torches, they were spent conversing. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner published research in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, based on years of recording conversations of the Juhoan-Si people in the Kalahari Desert, one of the last communities on Earth still living near the primitive rhythms of human life. The pattern she discovered is almost poetic. During the day, about 80% of what people talk about is logistics, where the animals are moving, which crops are ripe, complaints, negotiations, the practical work of ensuring enough food. Daytime talk is work disguised as conversation. Then the sun sets, and everything changes. Around the campfire, 81% of the conversation shifts to a completely different topic: stories. Stories of faraway places. Myths explaining how the world was formed. Jokes so sharp they make the whole camp laugh out loud. Wiesner's conclusion was bold, and it remains proven to this day. Firelight is where true human culture is born. Not in daytime labor, but in those moments when fire is created from darkness. Think about the true meaning of that circle of fire. It served as the first theater that humankind ever built, the first classroom, perhaps the first church. It is the only place where one can stop gazing at the horizon searching for danger, and instead immerse oneself in one's imagination to find a compelling story. This is the part worth contemplating. We often consider inventions only meaningful if they create a tool, a weapon, a technology you can hold in your hand. Fire is primarily remembered as an upgrade for survival, a way to cook food and ward off predators. But its true legacy may be quieter than that. Fire didn't just help our ancestors survive another night. It gave them hours of leisure. And it turns out that those hours of leisure are precisely what a species needs to begin to become something more than just a survival animal. The moment we have free time that isn't spent on survival, we begin to spend that time with each other. Now picture the day itself, start to finish. You wake somewhere close to dawn. The fire from the night before hasn't fully died. Someone tosses on more wood without being asked. Breakfast is whatever's left. Cold meat from yesterday's catch, a handful of nuts or berries gathered the day before. Nobody's rushing through it. Eating is social. People talk, half plan the next few hours, and nothing about it feels urgent. Mid-morning is where the real difference from your life shows up. A small group might head out to hunt or forage, but this isn't mandatory. If the hunt 2 days ago went well and there's still food stored, plenty of people simply don't go anywhere. Instead, they stay in camp and work with their hands, sharpening a spear point, weaving a basket, softening an animal hide until it's usable. Call it labor if you want, but it doesn't function like labor. There's no clock running, no supervisor checking progress. People do it because skill is currency here. Being good at something earns you standing in the group, and craftsmanship is simply part of what it means to be a competent adult in this world. When a hunt does happen, it rarely looks like the dramatic chase scenes you've seen on screen. Humans hunt through persistence. We pick a target, then track it at a steady jog hour after hour until the animal overheats and finally collapses. We're built for this in a way almost nothing else is, thanks to a body that sweats efficiently and sheds heat while moving. Most prey animals can't do that. They sprint, they cook internally, they go down. A hunt built this way might run 3 to 6 hours, including the walk there and back. Once the animal is carried home and butchered, everyone shares in the meal. And by early afternoon, the productive portion of the day is basically finished. What comes after that is the part modern minds tend to struggle with. Not much of anything. And also, somehow, everything that matters. People sit in the shade. They talk. They play with the kids running around camp. They groom each other, working through hair, a habit that does double duty as both hygiene and bonding. Some carve patterns into bone or stone, or string beads and shells into jewelry that serves no survival function at all. Researcher James Sussman, studying the Zhawansi, clocked roughly 6 hours a day spent in what he labeled social time. Hours with no output, no product, just people existing alongside other people. In a world with no currency, no contracts, no police to enforce fairness, your safety net is entirely made of relationships. If your camp doesn't trust you, they're under no obligation to feed you when your own hunt comes back empty. So that afternoon investment in laughing, talking, and simply being present isn't wasted time. It's the closest thing this world has to insurance. Then the sun drops, and the fire becomes the center of everything again. As you already know, this is when conversation transforms. When the day's practical chatter gives way to story, myth, and humor deep into the night. Sleep afterward wasn't necessarily one long, unbroken stretch either. Historical records from medieval Europe, backed by sleep research from the 1990s, describe a two-phase pattern before artificial lighting existed. A first sleep of around 4 hours, a quiet waking stretch of an hour or two in the dark, then a second sleep to close out the night. It's worth noting this pattern isn't universal. Some studies on present-day Hadza and San communities actually show continuous unbroken sleep, a reminder that ancient life wasn't one single script followed everywhere identically. Add it all up, and a full day breaks down roughly like this: 4 to 6 hours securing food or crafting tools, about 6 hours of pure social connection, roughly 8 hours of sleep, possibly split, possibly not, and whatever's left over spent simply sitting, watching, existing, with zero requirement to justify that time through output. What strikes me most isn't the hunting or the tools, it's that rest in this world was never something you had to earn first. Productivity wasn't the entry fee for being allowed to relax. You were never one bad week away from losing your worth in the eyes of the people around you. That alone separates this rhythm from almost anything we call a normal day now. So if you total it up, a single prehistoric day breaks into a fairly simple formula. A handful of hours spent on food or tools, a much larger block spent on other people, a night's sleep taken in one stretch or two, and a remainder that belonged to nothing but existing. No meetings, no performance reviews, no hour of the day owed to anyone who wasn't sitting right there with you. This wasn't a lucky exception either. This was the baseline for our species across roughly 300,000 years and dozens of unrelated cultures scattered across every inhabited continent. Then, around 10,000 years ago, that formula broke. Somewhere in the Fertile Crescent and later in pockets across the globe independently, humans began planting seeds on purpose and keeping animals penned instead of hunted. Agriculture arrived, and on the surface it looks like an obvious upgrade. More food from the same patch of ground, predictable harvests instead of the uncertainty of tracking a herd. But the archaeological record tells a much less flattering story about what actually happened next. Here's the mechanism, and it's worth understanding because it explains almost everything that followed. Farming produces more calories per acre than foraging ever could. More calories support more children surviving to adulthood. More surviving children means more mouths, which means more land needs to be farmed, which means more labor is required, which means still more children are needed to provide that labor. Anthropologists call this the population trap, and once a group steps into it, there's no clean way to step back out. You can't simply decide to return to hunting and gathering when the local landscape can no longer feed a population that size on foraged food alone. The door closes behind you. And the skeletons of early farmers confirm just how costly that door closing really was. Compared to hunter-gatherers before them, early agricultural populations were shorter, a strong sign of chronic malnutrition during growth. Their teeth show far more decay, the direct result of diets built around starchy grains instead of varied wild foods. Their spines and joints show repetitive strain injuries consistent with hours of stooped, repetitive labor, and on average, they died younger. The skeleton doesn't care what story a civilization tells about its own progress. It simply records what actually happened to the body, and in this case, it recorded a downgrade. Once populations grew large enough, something else became possible that had never existed before: specialization. Not everyone needed to grow food anymore, so some people became potters. Others became metal workers. Eventually, some became soldiers, priests, administrators, tax collectors. This is, quite literally, the birth of the job. The first time in human history that a person's entire day became something owed to someone else in exchange for a share of food they no longer grew themselves. It's tempting to call this whole shift progress. And in some sense, it obviously was. It built cities, writing, medicine, everything that makes the world you live in possible. But progress for a species and progress for the individual living inside it aren't automatically the same thing. Agriculture made humanity as a population more powerful. It didn't necessarily make the individual farmer's life better than the life their ancestors had a few thousand years earlier. That distinction rarely makes it into how we tell this story. And it's worth sitting with for a second before moving on. Here's a question worth carrying with you for the rest of this video. If you could see the actual data comparing your weekly hours to the roughly 17 to 20 hours your foraging ancestors spent securing food, would you want to know the real number? If a moment like that has you rethinking your own relationship with your calendar, drop a comment with what surprised you most so far. It genuinely shapes what we dig into next. And if you want more of these deep dives into what being human actually used to look like, subscribing is the easiest way to make sure you don't miss them. That trade, more security for less freedom, is one your ancestors never got to vote on. It simply happened, generation by generation, until there was no path back. Which raises the real question this video has been circling the entire time. Now that you can see the trade laid out this clearly, is your calendar actually working for you? Or are you just the latest link in a chain that started with a handful of planted seeds 10,000 years ago? 90,000 hours. That's the number sitting between you and your ancestors. 90,000 hours traded away, hour by hour, so that a species could grow larger, build cities, and eventually hand you a calendar packed solid from Monday to Friday. Your ancestors didn't spend their mornings deciding what to achieve. They woke up already enough. No title to earn, no ladder to climb, no retirement fund promising a freedom they'd get to feel later once the debt of working was finally paid off. They had that freedom immediately, every single morning, for 300,000 years. You sleep in one exhausted block and call the two a wake up a disorder. They slept in too and used those quiet dark hours simply to think. You squeeze creativity into whatever scraps of energy are left after work. They made things, music, jewelry, stories, because the afternoon was simply theirs to fill. We didn't evolve into a different species. Biologically, you are still that person by the fire. Same body, same brain, same need for rest and connection. What changed is the deal we struck. Somewhere back in a wheat field 10,000 years ago. Freedom for food security. Afternoons for population growth. Presence for productivity. So here's the question worth sitting with long after this video ends. If your ancestors woke up, already free, already whole, with nothing left to prove, what exactly are you still trying to earn? If this changed how you think about your own day, that's exactly what this channel is built for. Subscribe, because the story of what we lost and what's still buried in your biology is only getting started.